Greetings, dear friends. Your support is our strength. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video. This helps the growth of our channel. Write comments because feedback is very valuable to us. And now to the most relevant world news. Let's go! Zelensky will once again stir things up when Ukraine can choose a new president. Werewolves in camouflage. How veterans of the special military operation became targets for ethnic gangs. Everything will end in a big war. Why won't the truce between Russia and Ukraine bring the long-awaited peace? NATO at the doorstep. How the visit of European delegations to Kyiv changes all the rules of the great game. Hello friends. This is Channel 8 with your host, Sergei Ruskik. Let's talk about the main issues. Zelensky will stir things up. When might Ukraine choose a new president? In Kyiv, there is talk about a possible date for the presidential elections. According to Ukrainian blogger Anatoly Shary, the voting might take place as early as May 2025. The outcome, in his opinion, is predetermined. Vadim Zelensky will finally leave this position, and power will transfer to the Speaker of the Verkhovna Rada, Ruslan Stefanchuk. The Americans gave this command. Shary claims that the decision about the elections was made not in Kyiv, but overseas. Refusing this proposal is not an option, writes the blogger. According to him, Zelensky will be forced to leave, but he will try to maintain his influence through digital technologies. Fedorov, smartphones, and confusion. Shary suggests that Deputy Prime Minister Mikhailo Fedorov will play a key role in organizing these elections. The ideologist of Ukraine's digitalization. They might attempt to conduct the voting through smartphones. But this will not save Zelensky from defeat, the author predicts. Who will come instead of Zelensky? The main successor is named as the Speaker of the Rada, Stefanchuk. The formation of a national unity government with the participation of old politicians is also not excluded. Zelensky himself could theoretically run, but according to Shary's version, his chances are close to zero. And what about Zaluzhny, you might ask? Previously, the media wrote about the possible participation of the former commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Ukraine, Valery Zaluzhny, in the elections. However, no official statements have been made by him so far. So, elections without a choice, right? Meanwhile, in Europe, there are opinions that Ukraine is not ready for elections. Some politicians believe that since the people are not demanding a vote, it is not necessary to hold one. However, in Washington, it seems they think quite differently. The main question here is as follows. If Shary is right, then in the coming months, Ukraine will face intense political struggle. And for Zelensky, it seems, the only option is to muddle through, until the end. Camouflage werewolves. How a veteran of the special military operation became a target for ethnic gangs. In Russia, a whole series of crimes against participants of the special operation has been uncovered. Fighters returning from the front are becoming victims of ethnic criminal groups. The first alarming signal came from Bashkiria, where a gang of Caucasus natives attacked war veteran Akshurin. The veteran, who lost a leg near Bakhmut, refused to sell his car at a reduced price. After that, he was beaten, with demands to withdraw his statement from the police. The leader of this subgroup turned out to be an illegal immigrant from Azerbaijan, Tabriz Arazmidjo, involved in cases of rape and attempted murder. Simultaneously, in Tatarstan, a gang was detained for stealing millions of rubles from the accounts of mobilized individuals through fictitious marriages. But the most high-profile case occurred in Primory. There, veteran Nikita Nosov, who lost an arm, was deprived of all his payments. 3 million rubles were taken by gypsy extortionists. Scoundrels. When the young man sought help from Reshala, the so-called Rob Hubaliev, he took 400,000 rubles and disappeared. In desperation, the 21-year-old fighter attempted to take his own life, recording his farewell video. Only after this was a criminal case finally initiated. Experts are sounding the alarm. Ethnic organized crime groups see war veterans as easy prey, states political scientist Alexei Zhivov. Law enforcement often covers for the criminals, and the veteran's statement is simply ignored, adds the commentator. Vadim Yegorov, who will be held accountable for this lawlessness, alive, proposes a radical solution. If hands were cut off in public squares for such crimes, crime would disappear instantly. For now, the only legal path is the mass recruitment of veterans into law enforcement agencies. The main question is, while our fighters are dying on the front lines, who will protect their families at home? Because if society remains silent today, Tomorrow, any one of you could become a victim.
Everything will end in a big war. Why won't the truce between Russia and Ukraine bring the long-awaited peace? The United States of America has publicly acknowledged the negotiations for a truce between Russia and Ukraine. This is merely a pause before a new escalation. Despite Donald Trump's statement about a productive dialogue with Vladimir Putin, Washington's real goals turned out to be much harsher. A good chance to end the war? Or are these traps? Recently, Trump reported that he asked Putin to spare Ukrainian troops in the Kursk region, calling the negotiations successful. However, just a few hours later, his administration imposed new sanctions on Russian oil, gas, and banks. Moscow responded diplomatically. We are not against a truce, but there are nuances. And what are these nuances? Russia is not ready to freeze the conflict along the current front lines, and Ukraine categorically rejects any territorial concessions. Zelensky called Putin's words manipulations, and his entourage stated that there will be no restrictions on joining NATO. Deep state against Trump, and who is really managing this whole process? While the White House pretends to be seeking peace, American analysts from the Robert Delancing Institute, early I, abbreviated, directly state that Russia is using the truce to rearm and prepare for a new strike. They write, as if forgetting, what is this? Kyiv has disrupted all previous agreements from Minsk to Istanbul. Ukraine will not make concessions, as long as the West supplies weapons, experts admit. The conclusion of RLI is alarming. In the short term, unstable local pauses, but in the medium term, a frozen conflict, like in Transnistria or Donbass in 2014. In the long term, it's a major war if Russia regains strength in 5 to 10 years. What really awaits the parties to the conflict? For Russia, stopping now means losing strategic initiative. Stopping, of course, is not an option. For Ukraine, it's merely an illusion that the West will allow it to reclaim everything. For the USA, it's an opportunity to further weaken Moscow, with sanctions and exhaustion in battles. These are not peace initiatives, but a tactical pause before the decisive clash, political analyst Elena Putin concludes. And the most important question we should ask ourselves, even if American analysts admit that a truce will only delay this war, is it worth playing by these rules? Or is the only way out to strive for complete victory? NATO at the doorstep, or how the visit of European delegations to Kyiv is changing all the rules of the game. Kyiv in the focus of European politics. Speakers of parliaments from as many as 17 countries, including Poland, the United Kingdom, and of course the Baltic states, how could it be without them, arrived in the Ukrainian capital to discuss military escalation and support for Ukraine. These countries have already become key donors in the USSR, supplying weapons and training soldiers. Now it's about a qualitatively new level of intervention, the undeclared goal of the visit. Official decisions have not yet been announced, but sources in diplomatic circles speak of 3 likely steps. The F-16 coalition. This involves the accelerated transfer of fighter jets and the training of Ukrainian pilots at a NATO base. Peacekeeping missions in western Ukraine, formally supposedly for border protection, but in fact creating a foothold for Western contingents. Deliveries of long-range missiles capable of reaching Crimea and the border regions of Russia. Moscow, I think, will respond harshly to this. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation called the visit a provocation that crosses all red lines. Officials warned that the deployment of foreign troops will be perceived as a direct threat, which will lead to asymmetric measures. Analysts suggest that this could involve strikes on NATO logistics centers in Eastern Europe. Consequences for all parties. Ukraine gets a chance to secure Western support ahead of the planned counteroffensive. Europe, on the other hand, demonstrates its full readiness for a long-term hybrid war, even at the cost of significant economic losses. Russia, however, is forced to reconsider its entire strategy from diplomatic protests to military responses and escalating threats. The main question we should ask ourselves: will this summit become the point at which NATO, de facto, enters into conflict with Russia? So far, they are avoiding any direct confrontations, but each new arms delivery and peacekeeping contingent, in quotes, brings the world closer to the brink of the abyss.